What came first, the misery or the films? Um, I've got some high fidelity ideas going on, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to wax poetic about a few of them. Did I watch so many films because I was depressed, or was I depressed because I watched so many films? I'm over here thinking about a concept. Um, it might be deja entendu. I maybe should have looked it up. It might not be, but it'd be a more postmodern definition of that concept anyway. So maybe I'm entirely off base, but it's about one of my favorite years of films is the '90s, and I'm in love with its stunning, remarkable devotion to self-reference. I'm in love with that era's um, total and complete loyalty to itself. With all the postmodern flourishes that went into it, all the Whedonisms and all the Kevin Williamson-esque, Tarantino-esque, even the Jin Jarmusch or Linklater kind of things. I appreciate it a lot, especially the American films of that time. I mean, even Wong Kar-wai and certain Easterners were doing some incredible things too that you can possibly call postmodern, or probably certainly call postmodern. But the Americans really did it with a lot of gutso. They did it with a lot of I'm just going to say that they were shameless about it. They were entirely self-absorbed in their filmmaking. And by virtue, by folly, by proxy of that self-absorption, film itself is a medium. I think it was always self-absorbed, right? But I think it became more truthful about it because it was upfront. It told you that it was completely obsessed with itself. It was self-obsessed and sexy. That was film in the '90s. Hip, trendy, neat, awesome. So it's normal to watch a movie and to have that movie remind you of some aspect of your life. It's easy to see yourself and your life experiences in the characters and the scenarios that are being presented, the images that are being manipulated. It's easy to see yourself there. That's kind of one of the most magical things about film, is to see your own life in this facsimile of life, in the artificiality of it all. That's kind of the magical thing about it. But after the '90s, you start seeing film in your life more than the other way around. You start to really experience life, I think, cynically and as a true postmodernist. So I think audiences take a lot from each era of film. I think that's well documented. I mean, the '40s, the nationalist films of the '40s, the patriotic films post World War II or during World War II, that really helped to develop our national character, our national identity for quite some time. And then even in the '50s with the normalcy, or at least the fallacy of normalcy, was helped to indoctrinate expectations of conventional life, or the life most desired, for an incredibly long time. Even the '80s excess, audiences certainly took from the '80s. Now you can argue that one informs the other. I mean, with the life imitating art, imitating life is really what I'm going after here, or art imitating life imitating art. It's kind of a vicious snake eating its own tail kind of thing. You can never really blame films for anything, but films not only are reflections of symptoms and culture, but I think that they completely pre-identify it. I think they pre-diagnose it. I mean, I've said on here that I think Scream kind of predicted the bored white boy mass shooter kind of personality, obsessed with some sort of hyper-violent media with like some really pent-up sexual energy. I think that Scream completely nailed it, and it completely predates anything like Columbine and these things. I think that I can make a pretty solid argument that is the case with Scream, that it predetermined this trend, and it helps that it was deliberately a trendy horror movie. This trend of the bored, white, media-obsessed kid who kills all of his classmates. That's essentially what Scream is, with a few sexual hang-ups and like mommy issues. That's what Scream is. And misogyny. Remember, this is Scream. But you mean we don't have to be. We can look at things that are more visible. I mean, what comes to mind is like Top Gun and the boom in young men signing up for the armed for the Air Force after watching that film. Its correlation, its causation, it's entirely visible. Film has a power. It has a predictive power as well. I've talked about how I think that superhero films predicted kind of the rise of problematic form of nationalism with Trump and Boris. These other people rising up in power at the same time that our heroes are these billionaire superheroes who live on a hill and say fuck the government and solve the world's problems with their money. So the Tony Starks and Bruce Waynes, that kind of thing. I think you can make direct correlations to these things. But I want to talk like that's macro. Let's go micro. Micro, I think, is a lot more curious and inescapable. So what happens, I think that what 90s audiences took from 90s films was the realization that every film is entirely artificial, every film is entirely self-absorbed and self-obsessed, and obsessed with its high tension, obsessed with its high art even. So when an audience learns to basically be, it's like cynicism. It's like they learned how to be cynical, and not in a incredibly depressed way, but in a bored way. They learned to be cynical and chic, in a sense, from 90s films. And I think there's been a lot of fumbling of the ball since then. I think that films are taking themselves seriously again. Kind of, I see a lot less self-awareness now, for sure, than there was in the 90s. So, but you can't reverse what happened in an era of film. You can't reverse innovation. So it's pageantry. It's not authenticity. It's pageantry. It is trying to do this with a straight face and that kind of thing. You can take great messages from films too. I mean, it might be like a pussy whipped like liberal kind of thing to say that guess who's coming to get to dinner taught audiences a very important lesson. Of course, they shouldn't have waited till like what 68 or 69, whenever that movie came out, to learn that lesson. The blame is on the audience then, sure, and film as well. The blame is on both. That film, that's a lesson that should have been innate, inherent, that shouldn't have had to have Spencer Tracy and Sidney Poitier to teach it to you about an issue of race. But it's undeniable. It's a good thing that that film did, and we can make fun of it for being so milquetoast today, but it's a very, very valuable lesson. You see, I think that audiences are more willing to accept more cynical answers to things. Maybe that's why crime films have always been so popular, and murder mysteries, that kind of thing, because it kind of speaks to those darker aspects of ourselves, our dark places, that kind of thing. And it takes a little while for audiences to really digest and interpret and understand for themselves without any ostentation, without any fakery, an important and valuable lesson of humanity. And it may take a long time, but eventually they will learn. It's almost the lesson of propaganda in a way, but propaganda for a good cause. And then you're shown something over and over and over, it becomes normalized. And then eventually you're shown that thing in a way that truly is poignant, in a way that truly is sincere, in a way that is manipulated to be very moving, right? Film does everything it does by manipulation. Even the great avant-garde filmmakers. It's still a manipulated scenario. You film something, you're manipulating it. You are trying to evoke something from it. That to me is unnatural. But I think it's good. I still think it's good. I like that we live in a postmodern age almost when it comes to art. I like that. It's just, once again, which came first, the misery or the films? And it's impossible to know. Once you've seen, and it's always the same film over and over again, at least when you boil it down to its most base elements and themes. Thematically, they're all the same. And you're shown this over and over and over again, that you start to anticipate cinematic events in your own life, and you're either entirely astonished when one of those rare moments transcends cinema, because it's very difficult to transcend something that is so cinematic and therefore holy. But there are moments in life that transcend everything, all. That transcend all. There are those moments. Those moments are very few. Most of the time, though, when you have a real life moment and it reminds you of a film, that film is invading on a very sincere part of you. That film is invading on a life experience, right? Or are you invading on the film? Which is more truthful? If our entire personas and personalities have been made up by artificiality, by media, by music, by film, by literature, by theater, what's real and what's fake? Or does the distinction even matter anymore? I don't think it's mattered since the 90s. I don't think authenticity has mattered. Oh man, not a video can go by where I don't feel compelled to quote Dawson's Creek. My favorite character, Abby Morgan, says, and by the way, for the record, authenticity is a tired notion, last seen in the late 70s. Fucking nailed it. Fucking nailed it. But that's also a prime example of a fucking 90s teen soap opera commenting on the fact that authenticity is dead within its own narrative. I mean, it doesn't diminish the brilliance. It's still entirely brilliant. I've got a lot of thoughts just kind of careening through my noggin. I'm just trying to figure things out here. I think overall film is a good, but I think that is a stupid, or at least there's no like there's no utilitarian value of figuring that out, because film is irreversible. It doesn't matter if it's good. It's impossible to tell the difference now because our lives and film are so interwoven. I mean, people get elected to huge offices, to roles that will really shift and impact people's lives, and in fact may end them or make them longer. And they'll get up there and they'll quote a movie, or they'll get up there and they will posture about like a character they saw in a film. They will have learned their speech patterns from a tough guy or a really independent go-getter woman from a movie. They will learn that speech pattern. They will learn how to speak and operate from TV, from what is generally seen as being cool, or whatever you want to mimic. That's it. That's all of our personas. It's difficult to see who we really are because, say you don't watch films, fine. Do you listen to music? Do you read books? Do you go to the theater? Do you go to art shows? I mean, are you a fan of anything involving media? And our lives are just no longer kaleidoscopic. We all just live in the same kind of gray area where it's impossible to tell what's genuine and what's not, what's fake and what's real. At the end of the day, it probably doesn't matter. But it's fun to at least recognize that this split, this schism, this has happened. And I don't know if it's still happening. I think that rift, that crack in our cultural identity is just so deep that there's no reversing it. But I also don't think it was probably a good thing that it happened, breaking the spell. But it's like you opened up that box and now everywhere is cinema. Our life is not a movie, or maybe it really fucking is. I hate having one of those life-defining moments and then comparing it to cinematic idealized forms of that same kind of moment. it diminishes both the moment and the cinema itself. Well, that's that discussion. But if you're watching this long, I guess I'll just I've been working a lot lately. Working so much. It's a temp job, so I don't know how long I'll be there. But oh man, is it kind of monotonous? It really is. It's taxing. Get really tired. I've been trying to have some sort of outlet though. You know, getting into board games a little bit. 'Cause that's fun. That's fun. It's fun now. Wait a week until I go, gosh, did I play board games because I was depressed? Or was I depressed because I played so many board games or some shit? But, thanks for watching this video, okay? And that's all I got.